You're watching Fox and Friends First here on a Tuesday morning. I'm Todd Pyro.
And I'm Carly Shimkus. First, we go to Trey Yanks, who is live in Tel Aviv with the very latest on the war with Iran. Hi, Trey.
Yeah, Todd, Carly, good morning. Overnight, President Trump returning from Florida, making new comments about the war in the Middle East.
President Trump is speaking out, and he is not holding back. Hours after Iran's assembly of experts officially named Mojtaba Khamenei as the country's new supreme leader, the president of the United States made his position crystal clear. He is disappointed. He believes this choice will lead to more of the same problems that brought the United States and Iran to this moment of open military conflict. And Iran's foreign minister just responded, ruling out any negotiations with Washington entirely. Meanwhile, Operation Epic Fury is pressing forward overnight. U.S. Central Command continuing to strike targets across Iran. Israeli warplanes are still hitting Tehran, and Hezbollah launched new rockets and mortars overnight from southern Lebanon as Israeli forces hold their ground positions in preparation for further attacks. This is the picture of the Middle East right now, a war accelerating on multiple fronts, a new Iranian supreme leader being installed under bombardment, and a U.S. president who says the end is coming and coming soon. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. Let's get into it. President Trump returned overnight from Florida and immediately addressed the war. Speaking to reporters, he did not mince words about Iran's selection of Mojtaba Khamenei as their new supreme leader. When asked directly whether the new supreme leader had a target on his back, Trump paused, then said he did not want to say that, but he made his feelings about the appointment clear. He called himself disappointed in the choice, stating that he believes it will lead to, quote, more of the same problem for the country. That is a remarkable statement. The sitting president of the United States, in the middle of an active military operation against Iran, publicly expressing disappointment about who Iran selected to lead them and implying that this choice only prolongs the conflict rather than creating any path toward resolution. Trump also addressed the broader trajectory of the war. He pointed to what U.S. forces have already accomplished: the destruction of Iran's navy, its air force, and its communications infrastructure. He spoke about Iranian leadership being eliminated, saying that 2 full levels of the Iranian command structure are now gone. And when asked directly whether the war would be over this week, Trump said no, but he added 2 words that are carrying enormous weight right now: very soon. He called the operation powerful and effective. He said the United States is ahead of the estimated time frame. And he made clear that the military campaign is not done, not by a long shot. Just as significant as what Trump said is what Iran said in response. Iran's foreign minister issued a statement that shut the door completely on any diplomatic off-ramp, at least for now. When asked whether negotiations with the United States could be on the table, the foreign minister's answer was direct and unambiguous. He said Iran has a very bitter experience of talking to Americans. He said the question of negotiating with Washington would not be on the table. And he noted that it was too soon for the new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, to even make a public statement, saying the world should wait for his formal speech and comments, which were expected later. This is a significant development. The Wall Street Journal reported over the weekend that President Trump was being urged by some advisors to find a political off-ramp, a way to bring this conflict to an end through some form of negotiation or face-saving compromise for the Iranian side. Iran's foreign minister just made that path significantly harder. There is also the matter of oil. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps announced it will not permit a single barrel of Iranian oil to be exported as long as this conflict continues. That is Iran's economic leverage, using its oil supply as a pressure point against the global economy. And President Trump responded to that threat directly, warning that if Iran blocks the flow of oil from the region, the United States will hit Iran harder than it has been hit so far. 2 sides, neither blinking, and the bombs still falling. Let's break down the military picture, because the scope of what is happening is still not fully understood by most people watching the news. Operation Epic Fury has now struck more than 3,000 targets inside Iran in just the first full week of the campaign. 3,000. U.S. Central Command continued hitting new targets overnight, while Israeli airstrikes pushed forward against command infrastructure in and around Tehran. President Trump specifically cited the destruction of 3 critical pillars of Iranian military power: the Navy, the Air Force, and the communications network. These are not peripheral targets. These are the foundational elements that allow a military to fight a modern war. Without a Navy, Iran cannot threaten commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf or close the Strait of Hormuz, the critical choke point through which a significant portion of the world's oil supply moves every day. Without an air force, Iran has no ability to defend its own airspace or project aerial power against its adversaries. And without communications infrastructure, even the forces that remain cannot coordinate, cannot receive orders, and cannot function as a coherent military organization. That is the strategic logic of this campaign, not just destroying weapons, but destroying the systems that make weapons usable. On the northern front, Israel is continuing to strike Hezbollah targets in Beirut and southern Lebanon. Hezbollah launched new rockets and mortars overnight, but Israeli forces are holding their ground positions in southern Lebanon, positioning themselves for what military analysts describe as preparation for the possibility of a larger ground engagement if the rocket fire continues to escalate. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and top military commanders were expected to hold a press briefing to update the American public on the timeline and the next phase of the operation. That briefing will be closely watched both for what it reveals about military progress and for what it signals about where this war is heading. Who is the man Iran just selected to lead them through the most dangerous moment in the Islamic Republic's history? Mojtaba Khamenei, known for years as the Shadow Prince, has spent decades operating behind the scenes as the most powerful gatekeeper in Iran. He controlled access to his father, he managed information, he shaped decisions from the shadows while maintaining no formal accountable position that could be challenged or scrutinized. He is considered by analysts across the political spectrum to be an even more extreme hardliner than his father Ali Khamenei, who himself was one of the most uncompromising leaders the Islamic Republic ever produced. He has deep ties to the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and to the Basij, the paramilitary force responsible for suppressing internal dissent. Crucially, reports indicate that Mojtaba was a key figure behind the crackdown on protesters during the Green Movement in 2009, one of the bloodiest episodes of internal repression in modern Iranian history, and now he is the supreme leader, chosen not through any democratic process, not through any broad consultation of the Iranian public, but selected by a closed body of clerics in the middle of a war to continue a system that the majority of Iran's own population has already rejected. When Trump was asked whether Mojtaba had a target on his back, the president's careful non-answer was itself an answer. He would not confirm it, but he also would not deny it. And he made clear that this appointment, in his view, represents a choice that will only deepen Iran's problems, not solve them. In the middle of all of this, the strategy, the military briefings, the political statements, there is a human being whose name deserves to be said out loud: Army Sergeant Benjamin Pennington. Sergeant Pennington was the 7th American service member killed in Operation Epic Fury. He was stationed at a U.S. airbase in Saudi Arabia when Iranian forces launched an attack on that base. He was killed in that attack. Vice President J.D. Vance attended the dignified transfer for Sergeant Pennington, the solemn ceremony in which a fallen soldier's remains are received on American soil, treated with the full honor and respect that their sacrifice demands. Secretary of State Marco Rubio honored Sergeant Pennington and his fellow fallen service members, describing the United States as engaged in an operation targeting, in his words, the world's leading hostage taker. He called for a moment to offer thoughts, prayers, and condolences to the 7 Americans who have given their lives in this operation. Sergeant Pennington joins a growing list of names: Noah T. Etchins, Declan Cody, Major Jeffrey O'Brien, and others. These are not abstractions. These are not data points in a military briefing. These are Americans who put on a uniform and went to a place they were ordered to go and who did not come home. Every analysis of this war, every strategic discussion, every political statement must be understood in the context of what it costs. And what it costs is measured first and always in human lives. Our correspondent reporting from inside Israel described the feeling on the ground there with striking clarity. Israelis, he said, believe this war should go on for as long as it takes to destroy the threat from the Iranian regime. That is not a fringe view. That is the mainstream Israeli position, held by ordinary citizens who have spent years, decades living under the constant threat of rocket fire from Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Houthi attacks from Yemen, and the overarching shadow of a regime in Tehran that has openly called for Israel's elimination. They want this finished, and they are, according to our correspondent, willing to pay the price for it if it means genuine, lasting stability for their region. This matters enormously for understanding the diplomatic dynamics of this conflict, because even if the United States at some point determines that it has achieved its military objectives and begins to pull back from active participation in the campaign, Israel may not stop. As one anchor put it directly, the U.S. may say their time is done. That does not mean Israel will. That is not just a political observation. It is a military reality. Israel has its own air force, its own intelligence apparatus, its own strategic calculus, and that calculus, shaped by October 7th, by decades of proxy warfare, by the existential threat that an Iran with nuclear ambitions represents, leads to a very clear conclusion for the Israeli government and the Israeli public. This does not end until the threat ends. There is one development that came out of Washington this weekend that deserves more attention than it has received. President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin. That call in the middle of an active American military operation against Iran is not a minor diplomatic footnote. Russia and Iran have significant strategic, economic, and military ties. Russia has been a key supporter of the Iranian regime, providing diplomatic cover, economic lifelines, and military technology that the regime has relied on to sustain itself under Western pressure. The details of what was discussed in that call have not been fully disclosed, but the timing is unmistakable. A U.S. president conducting an active war against a Russian-aligned nation picks up the phone and calls Moscow. That could mean many things. It could be Trump signaling to Putin the limits and objectives of the operation, reassuring Russia that this is not the beginning of a broader American campaign against its allies. It could be an attempt to use Russia as a back channel to the Iranian regime, exploring whether Moscow can facilitate any kind of face-saving exit for Tehran. Or it could simply be routine great power communication, two nuclear-armed nations keeping lines of dialogue open even as the world around them is on fire. Whatever the substance of that call, its existence tells us something important. This conflict has dimensions that extend far beyond the Middle East. The decisions being made right now in Washington, in Tel Aviv, in Tehran, and apparently in Moscow are going to shape the geopolitical order for years, possibly decades to come. Here is what I want to know from you today. Trump says the war will be over very soon, but Iran's foreign minister says talks with America are off the table. Do you think there is any diplomatic path forward, or does this end only one way? Drop your answer in the comments below. This community has some of the sharpest takes on international affairs anywhere on this platform, and I want to hear your perspective. The best comments get featured in our next video. If this breakdown gave you clarity on a story that most outlets are covering without nearly enough depth, hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps this channel reach people who deserve to understand what is actually happening. Subscribe if you have not already. We are here every day covering every development in this conflict and in the broader world with the rigor and context the story demands. Turn on notifications. This situation is moving fast, and you do not want to be behind when the next major development breaks. And share this video with someone who is trying to make sense of what they are seeing on the news. Give them the full picture. I'm Hannah Blake. This is Global News Diary. We'll see you in the next one.